Welcome to Blacks and Jews in Conversation. I'm Shannon Taylor, the Executive Director, and with us tonight is John Markham, estate and appraisal expert. He has had 35 years of experience, and God help anybody who's had 35 years of experience in anything. And we've had this TV show for 4 years, so that gives you an example of what 35 years can do to a person. And we're going to explore the worlds of all kinds of people. First of all, he's had experience with teaching seniors in school systems and preparing people to guard and care for their valuables and their homes long before the day of judgment comes, and then in taking care of the estates upon the days of bereavement. And believe me, when those days come, you need help. And after the funeral especially, many times you really don't know what to do, and you have to pay taxes, and you have to pay all kinds of bills, and at the same time there's only so much room at the inn for all the different things that were of value to the not only the deceased but to the family, and you can only keep so much, and you can only divide so much, and that's in a place where there's no dissension. Now you can imagine if you had dissension and disagreement to all of this, what must take place. So we're not going to talk about the world where there's arguments and where there's fighting. We're talking about the world where you have property before, during, and after death, and you have to decide how you're going to protect it, how you're going to keep it, how you're going to guard it, and how you're going to do what's best to preserve, protect life of all the different members of the family. And for that, we, as usual, supply the expert. We are here, a not-profit organization on a non-commercial network, to provide you with expertise. And by the way, if you're interested in this career, this is also the advice to listen to see if this is something that might interest you. He'll talk about art appraisal, and he'll talk about all the nuts and bolts that can be on the periphery discussed in a 20-minute program. Go ahead, John, first. Tell us a little bit about your background. We'll do some more on next week's program, but I'm interested right off the bat on how you got into this field.
Well, I got into the field as a collector, and I started collecting when I was 16, and I will go into some more detail about that later on. But I was employed in the business world after I got out of college with a liberal arts degree, and I was very successful. And but it wasn't really something that held my heart, so to speak. And I particularly did not like what was entailed with progressing in the company, because it was a bit too regimented for my psyche. So I decided that I would quit, and I would get Siemens papers and I would go around the world. I'd always wanted to go around the world, and I had had a fairly successful career, so I had enough money behind me to be able to take off some time. And after some great agitation, I did manage to get my Siemens papers, and I went off to sea, but I had lots of detours along the way, all of which were quite wonderful. And I finally, when I got back after 7 months to the States, it was the year that the passenger liners in the United States had been closed, they had gone out of business, and it was very, very hard to get a job out on another ship, and I was still pretty much a kid in mentality, and I didn't want to go back to places that I'd already been. The irony was that I could have stayed on the ship on which I had been working. They would have made sure that my name would not have gone up on the board, and they would have pulled some strings to keep me. But since they were going back on the same route, I blithely told the captain that I really didn't want to keep going back and forth. So as a result, at this point, I was beginning to feel a certain amount of economic constraint, and I needed to have ready cash. And I had a friend who was dabbling in antiques, buying and selling them directly, selling them at auction. And he had, during the time I'd been away, constantly asked my family to let him know when I would be back, because he really knew very little about them, and he was doing fine, and he knew that I knew quite a bit more, and that if we teamed up, that together we should do very well. And so I just really got into that end of the business to keep in pocket money while I was waiting for a ship out. And after a period of time, I met a master appraiser, someone who had his own appraisal business and also was a lecturer at NYU and for the New York School of Interior Design. And some neighbors and friends were having an insurance appraisal done at their house, and they asked him if he would mind if I were to come and be around while he was appraising the objects in their home. And his answer to them was that if I could keep my mouth shut, which doesn't seem to be apparent right now, but I really can, and that he wouldn't mind, and that if I had questions, I could ask them over lunch, which was exactly what happened. And we had an immediate simpatico, and he invited me to sit in on his lectures, which I did. And then later I became his assistant, and he was very, very martinet. Used to drive me crazy at times. I'd be ready to spit, but now I thank God whenever I think of him, because when I go in to do a job, I follow the same pattern that he used, and I very, very seldom will leave a premises having missed something, because there's a very definite pattern that I use for the appraisals.
Well, you see, now that's all wonderful advice for our students, our listeners, who want to go into this kind of a career. And, you know, they can follow the exact same pattern, and not only for this trade, but for many Herman Melville kind of seafaring adventures, and then here you are. 35 years of wonderful experience with a magnificent reputation. Now you have a son with the magnificent name of Sean, and he went to Afghanistan, and he did a year in Iraq. Did he borrow this inspiration from you, or was that on his own? And of course, we salute his noble service in our country's name.
The inspiration for the military did not come from his father. Sean was interested in the military ever since he was 5 years old. At that time, he was interested in the Marine Corps. And I, as his father, and liking my sons to be able to spread their wings, tried very hard not to give any deterrent point of view about the military life, if I should have had any. And I felt that he would get his fill of it, he'd outgrow it, and that would be that. Well, I may be good at appraising, but when I am wrong, I can be very, very wrong. And he's been in the military now for 9.5 years with the National Guard. He's been activated twice for overseas duty, and he excels at it. He has won all sorts of accolades, including being Soldier of the Cycle when he was in basic training. I try to point out to him that in life, getting to do what you really want to do is reward in itself. To be that good at it is icing on the cake beyond belief. But as a parent, I naturally have the usual fears that my son will be damaged or killed or whatever. But it's what interests him, and I am very, very proud of him. And he's arriving home in New York tonight. He should already be home. He came back to this country on Saturday from Afghanistan after a year there, and went to Fort Riley, Kansas, and now he should be in New York at the moment, and then he'll be home for a good while.
The real icing on the cake is if he comes here to be interviewed on this program before he goes back to service. I was a musician, a drummer with military. My roommate from college is a a colonel in the JAG in the Air Force, did all kinds of court martials and was in charge of international law. I'll be interviewing him. So I extend an invitation should he want to do that perilous journey over here to this studio at any time. And again, I thank him. And woe to those naysayers who say that we're doing ill over there because we got rid of one of the great Hitlers of our time, Saddam Hussein, as well as those horrors who came and attacked us, and we still haven't even rebuilt what they destroyed when they attacked us. Now let's return. I understand that you've lectured not only for the New York State school system, but for large corporations such as Texaco World Headquarters, General Foods, and many charitable organizations after your studies in Europe and America. And I'd like to know right off the bat, how does one care for one's valuables before, let's say, one gets disabled, one gets infirm, and one has to depend on health care aids, God help us all, and how does one prevent the wasting of one's estate by the general passage of life?
Well, Shannon, the first thing that someone should do is to have an inventory of what they own. And if there are objects that they own that they're not fully aware of their purpose or their age or why they look the way they do, to try to seek out information. Now, they don't necessarily have to pay to have this done. I, as an appraiser, when I'm called upon, do appraisals for estates and for insurance and for gift taxes and things of that nature, and I produce what is known as an inventory and appraisal, the appraisal part of it being a dollar amount. There are two different kinds of dollar amounts. There are actually more than two, but the primary two are the fair market value, which is the value that a knowing buyer and a knowing seller would agree upon. That is the type of value that is used for estate purposes. The other most common value is the insurance value or the replacement value, one being very close to the other. And that would be a value that's placed on an object so that if you sustain a loss, that you can easily go out and replace it, that you could go out into the marketplace, that if it's a fancy object, you could go into a fancy shop and pay what the traffic will allow, and your insurance company will reimburse you, or your insurance company will give you the money, and you can go out and spend it whatever way you want. As far as having a professional appraiser, probably one of the things that people don't realize is that I am an impartial appraiser who testifies to the fact that you had certain caliber articles in your possession. So that if you're going to schedule insurance in the fine arts area, your insurance company is most likely going to tell you that you have to retain an appraiser, because that is a professional witness to the character of what they are going to insure, and also the value will be put on the item at a fair rate. Usually insurance companies do not like to recommend single appraisers. They will give you names of several different appraisers, or they will suggest that you even look in the yellow pages under appraisers. But most of the insurance agents have lists of appraisers that they have known to do a good job in the past and that you can choose from. However, most homes do not have items that require a professional appraiser. Used furniture, hand-me-downs in the family, clothing, shoes, tableware, liquor, wines, various types of jewelry. In the case of the jewelry, it would be an exception because that does, if you want to insure it, it's a scheduled insurance and it does have to be appraised. But you can do an inventory on your own. You can just go room by room, and insurance companies very often supply booklets with categories on each page for the various rooms that are involved in your house. And that's fortification for your family in knowing what is in the house at a given time. And so if you're beginning to age and if you unfortunately become ill and you no longer are able to walk through your house, let alone itemize what's in it. If you have kept such an inventory in a safe place, a fireproof safe, a safety deposit box, or someplace apart from your residence so that if, God forbid, you have a fire, that the inventory is still intact and you have something to make a claim on. But one of the things that is very important as people begin to age is they should corral their small, valuable articles in a given place and let a member of their family or several members of their family or a very, very close friend, someone that you trust very much, know where these things are. And should the individual get to a point where they're no longer fully aware of their surroundings, that could be removed and put in a still safer place so that it's not a temptation for someone else and it's not something that could inadvertently be lost. I am not under the impression that things get stolen from the elderly half as often as they are cajoled out of the elderly. The fact that you have someone that you may be relying upon for total care, that person very soon becomes the closest person in your life. I don't know if any of you have, or I imagine some of you have seen a film called Driving Miss Daisy, and that's a typical example of what can happen in one's life, that someone in that particular instance who came in as a chauffeur ends up being her only true friend toward the end of her life, which is in a way wonderful, but in another way where there are others that should be close to her, but they're too busy. I remember somebody interviewing a grandchild, or it was a class project, and they wanted the children to write something about their grandparents. And one particular child wrote, "Grandparents are the only grown-ups who have time." And that's very ironic because so many younger adults work themselves to death, but they don't stand back to enjoy what they've attained. And the most important thing of all is the liaison of psyches within their own homes. One of the saddest scenes I've ever seen is in the play Our Town, when she gets to come back for the happiest day of her life, which was her 16th birthday. And she's viewing it, and she suddenly realizes that everyone is so busy doing things to make her happy that they don't take time to even look at one another. And I have seen Our Town several times, and I am unable to get through that scene without crying. It's just the most valuable thing of life, and the source of art is the human psyche. And it's too bad that so many people do not take the benefit of what's around them.
If we're going to get into the
Philosophy.
the tragedy and the emotive part and the stressful part, let's go into a move. How do you make a move easier? How do you prepare for moving from one place to another? What do you leave behind? What do you protect in the move? What do you trust to others to move? How do you pack it? And how do you unpack it? And let's say the place is smaller or larger. All these considerations and insurance in the move. How do you mitigate the stress?
Well, I don't know that anyone can mitigate the stress. Moving is a very stressful situation, but the very first thing that you should do if a move is imminent is you should begin to cull your possessions. And books, for instance. Anyone who's into books usually ends up with hundreds of books in their residences, if not thousands of books. And as a matter of fact, I find it very strange when I go to look at a premises and I find hardly any books within it. It's not going to be quite as strange 20 years from now, since people prefer to read things on the computer, but at this point in life it's still very strange when you go into a house with hardly any books. To weed out the ones that you no longer want, and then to weed into the ones that you think you want and cull to the point that you can actually move them. And the best way to do that is on the books that you definitely want to keep. You know you are going to move, to pack them up in boxes yourselves and to pack them tightly enough that they're not going to be sliding around in those boxes and they're ready to go for the shipment. If there are breakable things that you're moving, and almost everyone does move breakable things, it is my opinion that those should be professionally packed by the mover, because then you are fully covered for the breakage if you carry insurance. Otherwise, you stand the chance of it being proven that the reason the object broke was it was not professionally packed. It was not done in the fashion that a professional would do it. So I strongly advise on breakables and on artworks that they be professionally packed, unless you're moving to an area near enough to you that you can move a lot of those boxes and a lot of those pictures and paintings and art and so on by hand yourself in the back of your car or with a small van, and then you're taking full responsibility. It's very important at a time when an actual move is going on and you have movers coming in to do packing and that you remove all jewelry other than jewelry that you constantly wear, such as a wedding band or an engagement ring or a watch that you have on you at all times, and put them into a safety deposit box or someplace that's very secure. It is not that I feel that movers are dishonest, but it is a time in your life where it is very, very easy to mislay a small item, and particularly an item of jewelry. You put it someplace that you think is secure, and then you forget where it was that you had put it, or the object that you had secured it in is now packed up and going on a move, and you may not unpack it for perhaps years after you move, because people do not always unpack the cartons when they move. They unpack the cartons that they deem to be most necessary, and then with all this having gone on in their life, they delightfully put it off and put it off and put it off, so much so that I can go into a house sometimes and find, after a 30-year residence in the house, that the people still have boxes that were moved there from a previous residence. It's just as we sometimes come across brand new articles in an attic or in a storage area in a house that were given as wedding gifts and have remained in the box ever since they were given.
I'll take them. I'm ready. No,
They
I
can
can
be-
use them.
They can be really good, Shannon. Those are things you might not mind taking. It's just very funny. But the reason that I say about the jewelry or money is that you will find that you begin to doubt someone that you don't want to doubt. And then when the day comes that you finally find it, you feel very slimy that you had such severe thoughts about innocent people.
My severe thoughts are always justified. I severely think against a lot of people, and I'm always justified, and I'm always wondering how I could have prevented it by convincing the people who I wasn't able to convince to guard against the people who I knew deserved the severe thoughts. Now, how do we prevent all kinds of problems by having full-time health care? How do we prepare for full-time health care?
Well, if I could answer that, I might be on the new president's cabinet. I do not know how you prepare for full-time health care. I have had a situation where I have had two elderly ladies that I've had custody of them for about 7 years. They were two of 5 sisters that lived together and had provided for themselves amply, in fact more than amply, but had come to a point in their lives where they had to have full-time care, which has amounted to, and this is reasonable for proper full-time care, it's far less than private nurses would cost, to much, much more than $100,000 a year just for the caretakers, because they had to be of a caliber because of the psyche and the attitude of the ladies involved, that when I had to take over watching this situation, I was constantly having people quit. So I had to find someone of a much higher caliber who would be able to handle situations of all different types. And it worked out very well, and the last of them just died about a week and a half ago.
that how
So-
it worked out by the person dying?
Well, the thing is, Shannon, we had gotten to the point out of quite a lot of money that it was getting to the point that we would have either had to have a reverse mortgage on the house, or the last of them would have had to go into institutional care, and I did not want to see that happen. We were not to the bottom of the barrel yet, but in a year or so, we really would have had to face some reality. And I was just aghast at the fact that so much money had been put aside and none of it had been squandered, but that's just what happens between inflation and healthcare costs and so on.
Well, this is
And-
where we're going in this country. This is happening more and more and more.
In
Uh,
this particular instance, the health care, not the live-in health care, the 24-hour health care was not taken care of, but hospitalization and doctors were taken care of with health care plans that are so amazing that in the case of a hospitalization that would amount to bills of between $13,000 and $14,000 in one instance, we were billed for $22.
The last words in the last minutes, eBay and Craigslist, are they helpful or not?
This, I'll just give you a little, I'll just give you an overcast. This is something that there are many facets to. eBay is fine. There are things that eBay has done to hurt the collectible field, but it has also done many things to make things available and bring them to fairly good prices. Craigslist is not something that I'm terribly fond of. I find that the cons outweigh the pros. The pros being that you can list on it free. But the fact that you can list on it free also attracts people who are professionals who know how to finagle getting objects from non-professionals who get involved in selling in that fashion, and sometimes end up with individuals not selling items that are perfectly good because they'll put in a high bid, and that knocks any of the early bidding out, and then just before the deal is going to be consummated, fall by the wayside or make a lower offer. There are a lot of things that happen with Craigslist that I find very sad.
I want to thank you kindly for coming on. I look forward to seeing you next week, where we'll discuss this further. And sadly, I don't think that we are doing justice to our elderly and our ill. And I'm happy for people like you who help out and have the skills to do so. And I recommend wisdom and guidance long in advance of when necessity requires it. This is Blacks and Jews in Conversation. A very happy Thanksgiving to everybody and to those who can still be thankful for the many gifts that we have around us. And I welcome your son back and all the other soldiers from overseas.
Thank you, Shannon, and I will talk to him about possibly coming on the show.